Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about the most recent bounce in the altcoin market. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. Admittedly, I was not planning on making this video. Not because I was, under the impression that the altcoin market could not bounce, but more so I was actually about to head out of town, and I'm still planning on doing that shortly after I make this video. And I knew that if I did not record a video before I left, and I just left for a few days and did not throw up a new video, then it might make people think that I'm just avoiding facing this bounce by the altcoin market. So rather than do that, I thought, why not just come on here, face the music, and talk about this most recent move in the altcoin market. I'd rather do that than just sort of stay quiet about it for the next several days. So the first thing we should note is that this has been a fairly sizable pump by the altcoin market. This week alone, it's up about 10%. I mean, not this week alone, more like this day alone, it's up about 10%. So a pretty sizable move by the altcoin market. Now, what I want to talk about is this in line with expectations, or is this out of line with prior expectations? At this point, I would still say it's in line with prior expectations. But if this continues and we get multiple weekly closes at higher valuations than we are today, then it might be out of line with prior expectations. And I want to try to do a good job of explaining what I mean. All right. Now, one of the things that I mentioned previously is that a bounce by Bitcoin off of its bull market support band could lead to the altcoin market, total 3, back testing its own bull market support band, right? So you might remember this statement. We said if Bitcoin holds the line in June, then it could yield a retest of the bull market support band for the altcoin market, right? You might see the altcoin market back test its 20-week SMA if Bitcoin bounces off of its own 20-week SMA. Okay, we've talked about this many times. And the reason we said that it could bounce is just simply, seasonality. I've said before that the highest I could see Bitcoin going this year would be around $35,000. We certainly could go higher than that. We might not even make it there. But that is what we previously talked about. So far, we got the bounce by Bitcoin. And total 3 has, in fact, arrived at its bull market support band. But actually, it's slightly above it. It is slightly above it. So that is notable. If you're not aware of where we are or where the 20-week SMA is and the 21-week EMA for total 3, it ranges from around 350 billion to around 356 billion. So clearly the altcoin market is marginally above the bull market support band. Okay? Now, the reason we said that total 3 can backtest this is because this is what we've historically seen in the pre-halving year, right? This is what we saw last cycle. And I didn't think it would be out of line for this to happen again. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, if you roll back the clock back to 2019, we know that the altcoin market fell below it and then had several back tests of the bull market support band. Some of them had wicks slightly above it, but none of them had weekly closes back above it until January of 2020 when we rallied and then we got faced with the pandemic. Okay, so that is something that we first need to point out, is that these rallies by the altcoin market back in 2019, they fell short of seeing any weekly closes back above the bull market support band, except for maybe this first one. But that's where we have to focus closely, is if you do get a weekly close above it, like you did over here in July of 2019, like we could today, it's also July of 2023, you would still need to see follow through the following week. Okay, so if we get a weekly close above it and then we close back below it the following week, then that would also not be a great sign. Okay, so we recognize that this is a pattern we have previously seen. It might not feel like it, but it is, right? I mean, look at total 3 today, and let's take inventory on what this move has looked like, right? This was about a 12% drop in total 3. If you take it from this point here down to the bottom wick, it was about an 18% drop. And from that point, it has rallied up about 30% to this most recent wick, right? About a 30% rally in a relatively short period of time. Did we see anything similar in 2019? We did, in fact, multiple times. We got these pretty big moves to the downside, right? This was an 18% move to the downside, and then we spent the next several weeks going up about 40% only to get rejected. And then we had another big drop here, also 18%, right? Both of these were 18% drops or so, only to then rally back up and then eventually go put in a new low when we hit a recession. So, and then there's also, of course, this drop here, about a 25% drop, and then we rallied back up a wick to the bull market support band, about a 23% rally. So this is not yet out of line with what we have previously seen. Now, it certainly feels like it is because of just how quickly the move has occurred, but it is not yet out of line with what we have previously seen. That does not mean it can't evolve into something that is out of line with what we previously seen. For instance, if total 3 were to get, multiple weekly closes above the bull market support band, and it's like holding it as support and back testing it and whatnot, then that would be one thing. I mean, but even over here, we were holding it as support, and it eventually fell back below. So it's still hard for me to sort of look at this and say definitively if it's different from what we saw in the pre-halving year of 2019 or not. I do remember total 3 getting this pretty significant rally only to fade it in the halfway point through the year and then to just back test it for the rest of the year. One way to maybe better visualize this is to look at monthly Heikin-Ashi candles for the altcoin market, right? So this is total 3. These are monthly Heikin-Ashi candles. And what you'll notice is that, you get your bull market year really, and then you get your bear market year, bull market, bear market. And then in the pre-halving year, you go up for a while and then you go down for a while. And then you go back up into your bull market year. That's what we've historically seen. So we've seen the down year. We went up for a little bit. We've come down for a little bit. This one over here continued down basically until the end of 2019, right? So it did last quite a bit longer before it actually, finally found that final low before. I guess we did have the pandemic drop. But then it ultimately went into a more sustained bull market that eventually took us to new all-time highs. So at this point, if we roll back the clock, one of the things I've previously said is that I thought that this rally over here, if we remember, it would sort of stop at around that 400 billion milestone. So far, it has. Now, the question is does this actually put in just simply another lower high, just like we saw back in 2019? Because the moves in 2019, while we did have some nice little rallies here that took place over a few weeks, they ultimately were just remembered as lower highs that were rejected off of the 20-week SMA on a weekly time frame. Okay? Now, again, I know there's a lot of people out there that want me to just say, or they'll say like, well, when are you going to admit you're wrong? And I will say, this, just to be candid, just be completely candid, this market is really difficult in the sense that in 1 week, the dominance rally of Bitcoin is seen as a success because it's breaking above 50%. And then you fast forward 2 more weeks, and then it's being seen as a failure because it's pulling back to 50%. The market plays mind games, right, with you, right? It plays mind games on you. And it's so hard to not get drawn into whatever the most recent move is. And that is why, you have to constantly go back to the charts and say, well, is this within the context of what we've previously seen, or is it not? And at this point, even with the Bitcoin dominance, last cycle we saw, and we pointed this out a couple of times recently in these dominance videos that we've done, we saw a rally up to around that 52% level, only to go back down to 50% before continuing the rally. And this back test here occurred in July, right? It also occurred in July. Now, what I don't know is it more important that it went slightly back below the breakout spot, or is it just that it went slightly below 50%? Because if you just take it as being below 50%, we're basically already there. If you take it as being below the breakout point, then that would mean the dominance going down to 49%, or maybe even slightly below 49% to be a fake out, only to potentially find support at the bull market support band, right? So the bull market support band for Bitcoin dominance is at around 48%. So we can envision a scenario where the Bitcoin dominance back tests the bull market support band and holds it as support, just as people think that it's going to, to break back down, right? Like, so the dominance bull market support band is heading up. And if the Bitcoin dominance were to continue to fall in, then it doesn't mean that it can't eventually find support and continue its rally much higher. But in the short term, it's hard. That's mostly going to fall on deaf ears, I imagine, because in the short term, alts are up significantly. Now, one of the things that we also mentioned is that this historically is a level that altcoins have found support. One of the things I've worked on trying to do throughout the years is, I have these macro theories, right? Where where you think like alts are bleeding back to Bitcoin, ETH is bleeding back to Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. Another macro theory being in the pre-halving years, you go up for half the year, you go down for half the year. But one of the interesting things about it is knowing how to sort of show these short-term hedges, right? The thing we must remember is that markets do not move in a linear fashion, right? It's a stochastic process. So in 1 week, a move by the Bitcoin dominance to the upside could be seen as validation that the dominance theory is correct. But the next week, if it pulls back to where it broke out from after spending a long time below it, it might be heralded as a failure. So how do you hedge this stuff with hundreds of thousands of people watching? And one of the things that I've mentioned is, well, you look at these points where support was previously found. So, this level is, so this is total 3 minus the market cap of USDT divided by the market cap of Bitcoin. When you look at this level has acted as support in the past, right? It has acted as support. And we had 2 sizable rallies off of this level. Now, one of those rallies by the altcoin market started in September of 2018 against Bitcoin, and it lasted until April of 2019, right before Bitcoin took off. And you can see that in that process, the altcoin market rallied against Bitcoin about 63%, which was a pretty sizable rally. I mean, to give you an example of what that would mean, a 63% rally would get the altcoin market all the way back up to 0.65, right? So it would look something like, connecting these dots right here. It would basically mean the altcoin market rallying all the way back up to this trend line is what would happen if it repeated what happened over here in September of 2018. Now, what's interesting is if the altcoin market were to rally against Bitcoin over that time frame in the same way that it did over here, it would likely not be seen as a bullish thing, because this rally over here by the altcoin market was actually during a period where the altcoin market and Bitcoin were getting crushed on their USD pairs, right? If you were to overlay Bitcoin USD onto this chart, what you'll see is that, during this period, alts were rallying against Bitcoin, but Bitcoin was basically cratering. And then Bitcoin dominance took back over in sort of the next year, right? And then the dominance went up again when Bitcoin USD rallied, and then the Bitcoin dominance went up again when Bitcoin USD rallied in the halving year as well. But what's interesting is that this move started in September. This one starting in June. Is there another move we can compare it to, right? Like, does it have to be compared to this one, which you could make the case that it could be? Could you also compare it to this one over here? In May of 2019, we saw a sizable bounce off of this level. And it bounced up over the span of 1 month. About 5 weeks or so, you can see that it rallied, right? So the total 3 divided by Bitcoin, total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, rallied approximately 30% before ultimately falling back down. Now here, this bounce has gone up about 20%. So when I look at this, just in a vacuum, it doesn't yet look any different than what we've previously seen. Even if it rallied up to this level, it wouldn't necessarily be different than what we previously seen. Remember, this is a stochastic process, right? The dominance has been in a macro uptrend for about 1.5 years now. Really about 2 years now, the dominance has been in a macro uptrend. And we've had no shortage of rallies by alt Bitcoin pairs during that time. In fact, this rally over here that occurred in June 2022 might arguably be more similar to the one that happened back over here in the summer of 2018, right? Like if you were to take a bar pattern and overlay this move, that might actually look somewhat similar, right? It actually fits it quite well. So why don't we take the bar pattern out even further to when it actually bottomed out right? So from that level, you'll see that this is what it ultimately looked like, right? So it rallied on up, it came all the way back down. It then the dominance, or sorry, the altcoin market against Bitcoin rallied back up for a while, right? Up here before then ultimately cratering once again. So, I mean, just for completeness, if I include the final plunge of the altcoin market against Bitcoin from this level, right, it looks something like that, right? So, well, no, sorry. I'm not let me get it from this point right here. So from this level all the way down to here is what I want to do. So that, right, that would be what it would sort of look like if you were to overlay it. So again, like, you could still eventually see that drop, that plummet of the altcoin market on their Bitcoin pairs, all the way down to 25% of Bitcoin's market cap. I still think there's a valid path to ultimately getting there, even if it takes a while. But if we're right here and we're just bouncing up, say 30% for a few weeks before going back down, then it certainly could come quite a bit sooner. So remember, in the last Bitcoin dominance video that we did, we talked about how this is an important level for the altcoin market, and that we have seen bounces by the altcoin market at this point twice before. We've also seen rejections from this level twice before as well. So it should not come as a huge surprise to see the altcoin market at least find some temporary relief at this level. Again, going back to the Bitcoin dominance, I suppose the question is, well, does it find support around this 49 to 50% level, or does it fade back below where it was for the span of 2 years? I would like to think it's more likely going to stay above this prior range, because we spent so long in that range, it took so long to break out. At most, or at worst, I would expect a retest of that 49% level or so before ultimately trending back up. So when I look at this, what I see is still in line with prior expectations, that the altcoin market was at a level that it's previously been at where we found support on their Bitcoin pairs. However, in both cases, they were just lower highs. Just like this was a lower high, and just like this was a lower high, and how all of these have been nothing more than lower highs. I would suspect that whatever this ends up being could in fact just be remembered as another lower high, even if it is a pretty impressive rally in between, okay? So when I look at it, it's hard for me to change my view on it just because it's rallied back up, because we have seen rallies like this in the past. If you go look at total 3 by itself, I mean, it is above the bull market support band, and that's something we should take into account, especially if we get multiple weekly closes above it, right? Especially that. But it's too early to say that yet, right? We simply do not know. Over here, we spent 3 or 4 months above it, and we still eventually fell back below it. So I think that's sort of the conundrum right now, is just because you get above it, last time it didn't necessarily mean anything. Doesn't mean anything this time. Last cycle, we got above it a couple times before ultimately putting in the final low, right? We got above it right here, and we got above it right here in early 2020, and they still did not mean that the bottom was in for the altcoin market. It didn't come until early 2020 when we had the pandemic. Now, again, you might argue that it's a black swan, but you could also argue that if a recession materializes sometime late this year, early next year, that you could see a similar outcome. It just might not be brought on by the exact same thing, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't see some type of a similar outcome. So please be aware of that. So I think again, this video, I'm just sort of doing it on the fly. I was planning on heading out relatively soon. So, but I also, again, I knew that if I didn't, I would never hear the end of it. So again, better to just face the music. So we have Bitcoin bounced off the 20-week, total 3 back testing the 20-week. It could go above it, or it's already above it. It could stay above it. We'll see what happens, right? I mean, it's too early to tell. The dominance has seen a bit of a hit here, but I think it's fair to say, after spending 2 years trying to break out of this range, to just go back to 49 to 50% does not necessarily negate the theory. Okay, you could always go back down to back test where you broke out from. I think that would be perfectly reasonable from a technical analysis perspective. that you could back test this level and then go back up. And that would be in line with, with what we saw last cycle as well, right? 52%, go back down to that 49 to 50% level, back test it, and then continue the dominance rally in August, right? We saw that last cycle as well. So that's where I still stand. I mean, the Ripple news, by the way, that has come out, of course, I have to imagine is long-term net positive for the cryptocurrency asset class. So I do think that is ultimately a positive thing. In the short term, I think you also have to wonder, is this move by the altcoin market, is it a function at all of the recent increase in net liquidity, right? So we've talked about this net liquidity model before, that it incorporates the balance sheet of a lot of different central banks. If you look at total net liquidity, right, it has been tracking the altcoin market fairly well, and we recently had a move up in total net liquidity. Now, net liquidity recently has not gone up because central banks are quickly expanding their balance sheets. The reason why net liquidity has gone up is because these balance sheets by all these other banks, of course, they're measured in their local currency. But when you add up total net liquidity, you have to convert those to US dollars. And recently, the US dollar has been capitulating, right? It's back below 100. So with the US dollar currency index back below 100, when you convert the local currency of these central banks back to US dollars, it ends up being more, right? Because they can get more US dollars for their local currency. Therefore, when you add up the balance sheet of these central banks, the total net liquidity is higher. So you could argue that while, sure, like some of this is because of the Ripple news, you could also argue that part of it is coming from this bounce here in net liquidity, right? It's gone back up to the upside. That's why you'll often hear people say that, like, when the dollar goes down, crypto goes up, and when the dollar goes up, crypto goes down. But the other side of it is, if the dollar is capitulating, how much longer till it starts to bounce back up and then sort of suck that liquidity back out? So that's kind of where we are right now. I mean, this could go on for weeks. It could go on for months. It's of course very difficult to say, but that's where we currently stand. So you have the altcoin market up about 10% on the week. Total net liquidity is also up on the week. We have the good news coming from Ripple. We have the bounce by Bitcoin USD off of the bull market support band that has led the altcoin market to backtest, at the very least, its own bull market support band and arguably take it out. I mean, it depends on what happens here over the next couple of weeks. Like, what happens if we just come back down by the end of the week and this is just a wick? Or what happens if in 2 weeks we're all the way back up here at 400 billion, right? There's a lot of different ways this thing could go. And it's probably going to be too early for me to make more of a definitive call on what this means. But the other way to look at this also is to go look at some of the individual altcoins, right? So, like, go take a look at ADA USD. You can see that it's rallied back up to its 20-week SMA. Go take a look at DOT. It's back up to its 20-week SMA. Link is back up to its 20-week. Avalanche is closing in on its 20-week. I believe Solana is slightly above its 20-week moving average, but also note that Solana got hit quite a bit harder than a lot of the other altcoins, right? Like, so this move here, even to where Solana is right now, it's still down 90% from the all-time high. So, if you look at ADA, it's still down from the all-time high 89%. So yes, Solana has seen an outsized move recently. Arguably, it was more so a mean reversion than anything else. If you look at Matic, right, also, or there the arrow is, right? We talked about it going back up to its bull market support band and back testing it. Uni, same thing, right? Doge, same thing. They're all going back up to their bull market support band. So then the question becomes, well, is it just a back test or is it a sustained trend reversal? Right? That's ultimately the question. I mean, I'm still in the camp that the dominance of Bitcoin is in a macro uptrend, right? Like, that's the camp that I'm in. Whether that plays out or not, I mean, I would argue that it's already played out for the last 2 years. Whether it continues to play out, of course, we will see. But that is still the camp that I'm in. And again, I sort of back that view up by just saying, look, total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin is, this was also the same level that it bounced at in September of 2018. It's also the same level that it bounced at in May of 2019. What's interesting is if you were to go look at the altcoin season index and take, say, like a 30-day moving average of this, there's a few times in history where it did, it was at this level. 2 of the times was when total 3 was already above the bull market support band. So like back in November of 2017 and December of 2020, when the altcoin season index was down here in Bitcoin season and started to trend back up, we know what happened to the altcoin market, right? The altcoin market exploded to the upside, right? So like if you look here in 2020, let me get the arrow because it'll be a little bit easier to use. If you look here in 2020 and in 2017, the altcoin market exploded to the upside when we came out of this. But there's also an example here in September of 2018, right, which is exactly when total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. That's also corresponds to this moment right here, right? Like September of 2018, you'll see that when it came out, it didn't necessarily lead to any major bullish move for the market, right? It came out of it, but the altcoin market still wasn't really doing that great, not until early the following year. And the difference, of course, being that in 2020 and in 2017, when we bottomed out at these levels, total 3 was above the bull market support band and trending higher. But today, here, September 2018, what was going on in September 2018? That was when total 3 was below its bull market support band. And I mean, it did go back up and retest it. I mean, you can see that in September of 2018 right here, that total 3 back tested its bull market support band. What's interesting is a lot of this move has actually occurred because of XRP. XRP is up a significant amount today. I mean, this is a 70% rally, a 73% rally in a single day. What's interesting is coming out of this move right here in September of 2018 when it bounced, right? You can see here and here, right? So it bounced here in September of 2018. It's interesting because XRP in September 2018 also had a 100% weekly rally, right? It rallied up 100% and went all the way up to around 80 cents or so, kind of around the same point that it is right now. And then it ultimately failed and then rolled back over. So I guess ultimately the question is well, is it just playing out like this one when total 3 was below its 20-week SMA? Or is it playing out like this one or this one when it was already trending above the 20-week SMA? The other thing to look at, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is to look at the social risk, right? So in 2017, the social risk was putting in higher lows. In 2020, the social risk was putting in higher lows. So arguably, this one and this one are similar in the sense that they were both putting in higher lows for the social risk. 2018, we saw the social risk putting in lower lows, right? We saw it putting in lower lows, just like what's happening today, right? So it's putting in lower lows. So that's, I think, where I'm struggling with this is like, social risk is trending down like 2018. In 2017 and 2020, when total 3 broke to new highs, it was when social risk was trending higher, not lower. And it was also when total 3 had been trending above the bull market support band for months before it actually broke to those new highs. This time, we've seen total 3 trending below its bull market support band for quite a long period of time. And so I don't know that we can definitively say that it's like this in 2020 or in 2017 when it's actually been stuck below the bull market support band for a while. Even over here in 2018, like if you want to compare it to 2018, we had periods where it dropped back down and then rallied back up. But I think the point is what is the invalidation? I mean, I suppose that if the altcoin market, were to continue to put weekly closes back up here, then let's say if the dominance were to break back down sustainably below these range lows, then that would be notable. But for now, what I see is I see the dominance has been in a rally for a long time. If you exclude stables, it's been in a rally since since May of 2021, right? It's been in a rally since May of 2021. And interestingly, with this top here on dominance at 58%, when you exclude stablecoins, we know that this rally back, that was basically right around where it topped out before it ultimately went much higher just a few months later. So when I look at this, I see the dominance has been in a fairly sustained uptrend for a long time. It could be coming back down to back test some of these breakout levels like it has previously done. We have a lot of altcoins that are at their 20-week SMA. Polkadot is at the 20-week, Cardano is at the 20-week, Avalanche, Matic, Litecoin might actually be above. Yeah, Litecoin's above the 20-week, but historically it tops out in June or July of its halving year as well. So we'll need to keep an eye on that. So again, if it sounds like I'm rambling, it's because I am, right? Because I was not planning on making this video. I was planning on leaving town. I was going to be traveling for a few days, and I was just going to not put out any videos for a little while. But I knew that if I did that, then I would be inundated with comments. So that's where we currently stand. I hope I've done a decent job of trying to explain where we currently stand in my view. My view is that until proven otherwise, the altcoin market, right? Until proven otherwise, this is still no different than what we have previously seen. No different. The alt market bounced against Bitcoin in 2018. It bounced against Bitcoin in 2019. But by the end of 2019, it had come all the way back down to 25% of Bitcoin's market cap by the end of 2019. Yes, we have a bounce right here. Is it any different than Exhibit A and Exhibit B? I don't know. I mean, that's up for you to think about. You know, this rally right here, by the way, once it bounced back up to the bull market support band at around 0.53 or so. That's right around where the bull market support band is right now, maybe slightly lower. It's at 0.52. So 52%. So the altcoin market making up approximately 52% of Bitcoin's market cap. Right now it's at 46%. My guess is that the Bitcoin dominance rally will eventually continue. It might be back testing that 49 to 50% level, but my guess is that it will eventually continue, and it'll be because net liquidity starts to go back down again. Okay, because again, like if you pull up, if you just pull up total 3, the altcoin market, and you pull up that net liquidity chart and you overlay it, right? If you overlay the net liquidity chart over here, I mean, you can see that it has bounced recently, just as total 3 has bounced. So is the altcoin market bouncing today because of the Ripple news, or is it bouncing because you're seeing total net liquidity go back up? And the reason total net liquidity is going back up is because the central bank's balance sheets denominated in US dollars is going up. Not necessarily because they're expanding their balance sheet, because most of them are not, but when you convert their local currency to the dollar, it is going up. So liquidity has bounced, total 3 has bounced, but what happens if in 6 months the dollar's going back up, right? And what happens if the Fed just keeps draining the assets, right? Their balance sheet, which is what they're going to continue to do. And so is the ECB and many other central banks as well. So that's where we currently stand. I want to say one more thing, right? Just to sort of clarify something. Last cycle, I was already buying altcoins. I was buying them back in Q3 of 2018. So last cycle, I started buying altcoins here, and I thought it was a genius. And then I got wrecked. And then I thought it was a genius again. And then I got wrecked again. So then this cycle, I was just like, you know what? Rather than buy altcoins here and every spot in between like I did last cycle, why not just stay Bitcoin heavy? Crypto portfolio that's Bitcoin heavy, because I expect the dominance of Bitcoin to go up, right? So just stay Bitcoin heavy until you reach the early phase of the halving year potentially, or maybe late of the pre-halving year, and then get more interested in the altcoin market. That was what I've told myself, and that is why I've been so stubborn on the altcoin market. It's not because I don't think they can't ever go higher. I think many altcoins will put in new highs eventually. It's just that I lived through this before, and I remember vividly a lot of these rallies that ultimately just failed and eventually put in new lows after, one new low after another. And during that entire process, you know what went up the entire time off and on? The dominance. During this entire process, while Total 3 was figuring out what it wanted to do, dominance continued to go up. So by keeping your crypto portfolio Bitcoin heavy for that time frame, it helped preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. Now, admittedly, while you're living through it, it's really difficult because a lot of the market will just, be, you'll see weeks where the altcoin market rallies 20% in a single week, and it might give you the feeling like you're just completely missing out and you're sitting on the sidelines. But this was what my own experience was in the last cycle. to just keep the crypto portfolio Bitcoin heavy throughout the the bear market year, the pre-halving year, and even the early stage of the halving year, and then only get interested more so in the altcoin market once the dominance is much higher. A lot of people are going to say the dominance rally is null and void now that it's pulled back to 50%. But again, what were they saying when it was pulling back here, and what were they saying when it was pulling back here? Were they saying the same thing? How is it any different? How is it any different this time? So I think what we're going to see is you might see the dominance pull back to that 49 to 50% level. I would still expect the dominance to continue to break out to the upside. It could be because Bitcoin's going up. It could be because Bitcoin's going down. That is what I would ultimately expect to see. In the shorter time frames, yes, the altcoin market is outperforming Bitcoin. We did see this last cycle as well a couple of times, as we showed with the total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin chart. We've seen that before. We saw that it was a support level before. It doesn't necessarily change the macro thesis. So that is where we stand today. I'm going to be traveling for the next few days, so I would not look for any videos from me likely until Sunday or Monday. If you do get a video from me, then it'll be just because I find some time while I'm traveling to make one, but I would not go into it assuming that's going to happen. So again, what I say today is probably going to age like milk over the next few days, right? But my general expectation is that as we continue to traverse through the pre-halving year, the dominance of Bitcoin should go up, not in a straight line. Alts should still bleed against Bitcoin, not in a straight line. And eventually, the altcoin market will more convincingly bottom out on their Bitcoin pairs. Some of them already could have, but there's many that have been putting in new lows recently on their Bitcoin pairs, right? So that's the camp I'm still in, is that Bitcoin outperforms the altcoin market for most of the rest of this year. If we do see relative outperformance by the altcoin market against Bitcoin, it's likely going to only last a few weeks to a few months at most, just like we saw last cycle. When you're in that period of time where the altcoin market is outperforming Bitcoin, it might make you think that the dominance is never going to go back up, but we know that when Bitcoin moves, it can move quickly. We know that when altcoins move to the downside, they can move to the downside quickly, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I know I've been rambling quite a bit, but I made this video sort of on the fly. No real plan to make this video. I knew that if I didn't, I would be in trouble with you guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. We'll see where we are in a week or so, and I'll provide an update then. Thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next time. Bye.